Welcome to this humanitarian talk on Nexus, quality and interoperability, a success story of cash in Yemen. The discussion of today will be recorded and made available on the European Humanitarian Forum portal during the forum. Today, we will discuss the positive experience of using cash as a modality of delivery in Yemen by the EU and its partners, and we will highlight the feasibility of the continuum of assistance in a very challenging context, such as Yemen. The use of cash transfer is widely recognized as the most efficient and effective way of getting assistance to people affected by conflict and disaster. This, if local markets are fully functioning and all conditions are in place for beneficiaries to access those markets. Globally, the EU is committed now to allocate 35% of its assistance in cash. Cash can increase impact, complementarity of humanitarian programs, and can allow for better sequencing between emergency and longer-term assistance, especially through the use of interoperable lists of beneficiaries. Interoperability offers a concrete mechanism to enhance efficiency and effectiveness of aid, allowing convergence and complementarity of different services needed by a given beneficiary. Interoperability also represents for us a cornerstone of Nexus in action, providing a common database for emergency and development actors, allowing also transfer, graduation, or referral actions. Today, we will speak about the valuable experience of using cash in Yemen, but we will also try to go a little farther and to discuss how we can improve the quality and the impact of our collective response in Yemen by using interoperable and referral systems, complementing services, and by linking emergency assistance with longer-term actions. DRC is the lead of the Cash Consortium of Yemen, and the response of the Cash Consortium is triggered by agencies such as the local NGO Building Foundation for Development, operating the rapid response mechanism under UNFPA lead. The initial response is provided within 72 hours of a given trigger, for example, displacement. The registration of beneficiaries in the rapid response mechanism allows for real-time transmission of rapid response mechanism registration to the Cash Consortium of Yemen eligibility assessment platform. In addition, high-wood insecurity could also trigger the activation of the Cash Consortium of Yemen, with WFP referring beneficiaries to the consortium for cash assistance. Following the Cash Consortium of Yemen assistance, there is an ambition to transition into other forms of assistance, including longer-term ones, based on needs. Now I'm going to introduce the panelists who are here today for this humanitarian talk. Mr. Nestor Owomuhangi is the UNFPA representative to Yemen. Nestor has been engaged in humanitarian and development programs for over 26 years, mostly with UNFPA and within the UN system. Before Yemen, Nestor has worked in Iraq, Lesotho, and Uganda. With his background in both humanitarian and development context, Nestor will bring to this discussion the perspective of an agency which is leading the rapid response mechanism. Mrs. Taline El Khansa is the country director of the Danish Refugee Council in Yemen. DRC is the lead agency for the Cash Consortium of Yemen, one of DRC's major projects in the country. Taline has been working in the humanitarian sector for nearly a decade, focusing on the Middle East. Mr. Mark Gordon is the WFP Deputy Country Director for Yemen, and in this role, Mark oversees the integration of WFP program strategy in Yemen, ensuring evidence and beneficiary feedback inform the evolution of WFP life-saving and life-changing activities. In addition, Mark oversees that the outcomes of these activities contribute to inform existing coordination structures. Mr. Hamza Al-Sanafi is the Rapid Response Mechanism Project Manager for Building Foundation for Development, a Yemeni organization. After dedicating more than half a decade to the humanitarian response in Yemen, and after managing numerous funds in different sectors, Hamza has developed a deep understanding of the crisis. As a Yemeni national, Hamza is determined to having a role in assisting his community and in making a difference. I will now ask all speakers 2 questions, to which I would ask you to respond in 2 minutes. Let's first try to understand how the current cycle of assistance works and how cash enables greater complementarity. From the moment of the trigger, let's say a given displacement, to longer-term assistance. Nestor, I will start with you. Could you tell us more about the very first hours after a new emergency when the rapid response mechanism is triggered, what is UNFPA response? How UNFPA makes sure that the data gathered by the agency can be used by other actors which are part of the rapid response mechanism? You need to put the mic on. Nestor, we cannot hear you.
You hear me now? Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great. So, yes, indeed, UNFPA leads the rapid response mechanism, which is basically a partnership of three UN agencies, UNFPA, WFP, and UNICEF. And this mechanism is triggered when we receive alerts. These alerts come from different sources. Could be local authorities, could be national authorities, our own UN staff that are based in humanitarian hubs, but most importantly, the NGOs and their local networks. Now, once we receive these alerts, then we dispatch teams that go to these communities that are displaced and initiate the process of enrollment using standard forms. Now, this is a basic enrollment that tracks basic data at the household level. And this involves basic demographics. It involves contact details, the household size, civil document reference if they are available, and most importantly, displacement information and previous humanitarian assistance. Now, once we get this data, we clean it up. Clean it up in a sense that usually this data, some of these people who are displaced may have received assistance in previous weeks. Some names may be missing, others may be duplicated. So we clean up this data and then initiate the process of distribution of the 3 kits from the 3 agencies. Immediately we upload this data on an online platform and clean it up again and make sure that it's readily available for clusters use. And we endeavor to distribute this data twice a week, sometimes daily depending on the emergency, but usually twice a week. We ensure that all clusters have information on what the populations that have been cleared. Now, the importance of this data is that it's clean. It doesn't omit individuals, doesn't exclude families, as was the case before. And there is evidence that actually this data has helped to reduce the length of period of time when individuals and households were receiving rapid response kits. And even now, humanitarians are able to plan much better, considering that they know exactly where people are, where they are going to, and where they come from.
Thank you, Nestor. Hamza, can I ask you what is your role in the rapid response mechanism, especially when an emergency occurs?
Okay. I'm initially best greeting for all. I am Hamza Al-Sanafi, who's in charge of RRM Rapid Response Mechanism Project Manager with Building Foundation for Development, BFD, since September 2019 up to now. I'm in charge of leading a rapid response mechanism in 4 governorates, contributing in designing, planning, implementation, and closing the project. You know, my core roles in a rapid response mechanism can be summarized into 2 stages, internally and externally. I contribute in setting up the financial plan, technical work plan, meal plan, and field visit plans. Also, the assumption for the potential of worst scenarios might take place, particularly in the most hard to reach areas and the frontline areas, because BFD has been operating RRM Rapid Response Mechanism in the borders of the conflict areas. So for the internal stage, I contribute to arrange all the needed materials, documentation, capacity building for the field staff to ensure all needed materials are, well available. In the external stage, we have been set a network in the four governorates, including donor, calisters, stakeholders, community committee, health facilities, and concerned authorities. So this network aims to provide us with the alerts, okay, for the null displacement, hopefully to respond rapidly. In case of trigger, the most worst situation, okay, in the hard to reach areas and in the frontline areas, okay, BFD has assumption in advance to be prepared well, to have well experienced field team, operational room for the frontline areas and the areas that cannot be covered well for network. Of course, we have been passing through all stages, starting from receiving the alerts, verification level, registration, distribution, and post-distribution monitoring. In addition, we have FCM, feedback complaint mechanism, which aims to receive the complaints from the newly displaced and community households, to address their complaints, and we submit all these reports on the monthly basis. Of course, RRM is the first line response, okay, which encounter the real needs of the newly IDPs, community, and beneficiaries, okay, particularly in the most hard to reach areas and frontline areas, which are referred, in which we use the referral system to the concerned clusters, service providers, hopefully to provide accordingly. The referral system, okay, is aligned with RRM to grasp and to raise the needs of the service after, like shelter, NFIs, protection, GBV, empowerment, and so on. So I think I summarized my role as a rapid response mechanism manager, and what are the stages and procedures we take for the potential of getting worse scenarios, and how to provide a rapid response mechanism in such case. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Hamza, for this detailed description of your role and activities as a first responder on the ground. Talin, I would like to ask you about the first hours of the Cash Consortium of Yemen activation. How does this link back to the rapid response mechanism in terms of data sharing and eligibility criteria of beneficiaries? What is the impact of the interoperability between the rapid response mechanism and the Cash Consortium of Yemen on the assistance that beneficiaries received?
Thanks so much. Really, when the Cash Consortium of Yemen was formed back in mid-2020, it was really built upon the key concept of interoperability with the rapid response mechanism. The Cash Consortium partners at the moment are DRC, IOM, NRC, Mercy Corps, ACTED, and Solidarité. Partners in the Cash Consortium provide emergency cash assistance within 14 days following a displacement or a shock that increases vulnerability of families. For example, this can be increased vulnerability due to damage to homes or loss of assets, as we see during the rainy seasons in Yemen, or it could be, as we saw in the last quarter of 2021, displacement due to a shift in front lines within Hodeidah Governorate, or due to the escalation of conflict in Marib. Nestor has described how RRM receives alerts and triggers data collection, registration of beneficiaries, and then distribution. One of the key recipients of this information from the RRM is the Cash Consortium of Yemen, which then triggers this emergency cash assistance. Essentially, by relying on the data of families that are registered through RRM, we are reducing beneficiary fatigue of assessments, we are reducing the overall response time, and we're streamlining the sequencing of aid. On the ground, when we have an instance of displacement, what we effectively see is RRM response followed by a shelter response followed by a cash response. And in some cases, we also see is that the RRM partners in a geographic location may also be shelter partners and cash consortium partners, which really makes the process significantly more efficient and reduces overall operational costs. Really, the intention of the interoperability is to ensure that assistance is timely, is sequenced, is efficient, and is life-saving. So by providing cash assistance, our intent is really to support the family's situation for a few months to help them in stabilizing until they are enrolled in longer-term assistance, such as monthly food distributions, or receive further assistance through specialized services via referrals based on their individual situations.
Thank you, Taline. Very, very, very clear. Mark, could you tell us about WFP's possible role in this cycle of assistance, especially if we understand this is still very much work in progress? Where do you see WFP added value, and how WFP is working with the Cash Consortium of Yemen to make these referrals interoperable?
Fantastic. And I think what we've heard so far clearly articulates a multi-sequence of events that allows households, men, women, boys and girls that have been displaced due to conflict, natural disaster, or other factors to receive a progression of assistance. Nestor mentioned the RRM mechanism, which WFP is pleased to be a core member of, ensuring that those first few days of assistance contributed by WFP, UNFPA, and UNICEF is met. Then, through the interoperability of information, the Cash Consortium and its members are then able to continue that assistance. And as that progresses, this then provides the opportunity for WFP to look at how the various needs of the populations of the groups that we're targeting can be assisted with more sustained and protracted types of programs. And I think what was mentioned by the previous speakers is quite clearly this period where the Cash Consortium is able to step in and provide that post-14-day program to ensure immediate needs are met, then allows agencies like WFP and other relief agencies, but also ones that can look at sort of promoting recovery and trying to look at self-reliance, to be able to step in. And this involves WFP, for example, being able to assess the level of need and then how we can, for example, enroll the displaced households into our ongoing relief programs. We're currently, as you're aware, with the need in Yemen, assisting approximately 13 million people a month. But at the same time, if there is not that acute need for humanitarian assistance because the IDPs have been able to establish themselves, how can we potentially enroll them into other programs that we run with local NGOs that start to look at self-reliance, that start to look at regenerating and rebuilding livelihoods? And at the same time, how can we use the information that's been collected at the onset of the program and as they transition from the Cash Consortium support into programs that also address malnutrition, social behavioral change, communication, and also how we can use incentives to encourage children to re-enroll into school. And WFP, as an actor that supports these different types of programs, sees itself as being not only in the front end with the RRM, but then as they transition out into these longer-term programs that can potentially continue to receive relief, or if the situation permits, looking at how we can build their livelihoods.
Thank you, Mark. Now that we understand better how this cycle works and also your respective roles and achievements, I would like to invite you to go a little bit deeper into what we should be focusing on the next year. Where should we increase cash assistance in Yemen? And what is the added value for beneficiaries? In what direction should we move forward? How could we create links with more stakeholders, being humanitarian or developmental ones? And what opportunities are there in the future? How will this improve the quality of our response? Hamza, I will address you first. Can you tell us more about what newly displaced people need when you meet them as a first responder? And also, how can we help them to preserve their dignity?
Okay. As long as BFD has been operating since 2019 up to this moment, providing rapid response mechanism target the newly IDPs. Okay, of course, a lot of learned lessons, are available. So I know time is running out and my time is very limited to this question. So as first line response, and as long as we have been encountering the newly IDPs, number one, we need to have a rapid and active assistance goes in line with RRM. For example, cash assistance, if goes in line with RRM, will be much better. Also, the other service providers, particularly in the most hard-to-reach areas and front line, shall be more active to provide the assistance that are referred to their concerned clusters. BFD highlights on the protection mainstreaming GBV, parts in our work, hopefully, to keep the priority for female, because female is one of the obstacles they are suffering in the most hard-to-reach areas and frontline areas, and also in the abnormal ones. So we put all these consideration and practice in our field assistance. Also, we have the to build the resilience and empowerment, at least to reply and rely on themselves in the contingency level. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamza. Nestor, for the future, can I ask you, how can you strengthen further the system, especially when it comes to the aspect of interoperability, so namely the single database, but also how can we strengthen the overall efficiency of the response to beneficiaries?
Thank you. Already a lot of work is going on to improve the system. As we speak, recently we've modified the RRM enrollment tool by adding questions from other clusters like WASH, CCM, protection, and education clusters. Make sure that we avoid additional assessments by these clusters. So that's one. We are also working with closely with the CRASH consortium to integrate the two systems of the population data, such that we have one single shared system for data management in order to streamline information, to eliminate discrepancies, duplications, and reduce workload for the partners. On the other hand, we are looking at IOM's DTM, and of course, IOM has a long experience in the field of displacement and tracking population movements. Unfortunately, DTM is not operational in the north, and what we are looking at in our discussion, we are looking at a way of having RRM data integrated into the DTM or DTM processes, such that DTM is able to capture populations both in the north and in the south. Alternatively, we are also looking at maybe introducing a common tool, which could be a common validation of displacement system, where data will be verified by both RRM and DTM, and which will be shared by all humanitarians. So instead of having RRM data and DTM data, maybe seeing how we can actually have combined both. So there is a lot of effort on ensuring that this takes place. Of course, if it was in normal circumstance, we would have government providing lead and would have been able to support this process. But in a situation of ours, like ours, we have to contend with what we have. So we believe if we can generate this data on time, if we can make sure that this data is reliable and that it's available for anybody who wants to use it, we would have had a long way in improving the delivery of assistance. Over.
Thank you, Nestor. What you mentioned looks quite encouraging in terms of initiatives to further strengthen the current system. Tallene, in your view, what is needed to improve the Nexus and to overcome challenges in further operationalizing interoperability with engagement of all actors in Yemen?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There's three main things that I'd like to touch upon. First, we know that there are development programs being implemented in Yemen, and we need to create clear linkages to these programs, such as social protection schemes. If we really want to support families and increase their resilience to future shocks, this is definitely a necessary step. And this is something that the CASH Consortium is currently working on. But practically speaking, what we need are very clear linkages and interoperable pathways for vulnerable families who have been supported by RRM, who have been supported by the CASH Consortium or by other actors to then access social protection schemes or other longer term and development interventions that focus on this form of longer term support. At the moment, there is still a bit of disconnect in the Yemen overall response between emergency humanitarian actors and between development solutions, and we need to look at how we address this disconnect. One thing that we could possibly consider is how can we adapt the overall country response strategy and architecture so it does encompass both humanitarian needs and development approaches and creates synergies between actors in all parts of the Nexus. How can we transition communities from short-term assistance to this longer-term sustainable solutions we're talking about, such as livelihood opportunities, such as how can we support them in increasing and improving their access to financial inclusion schemes, or again, how do we facilitate inclusion in protection schemes? But what we really are talking about here is we need to reconsider how the Nexus is better reflected and articulated as part of the overall countrywide response plan and its priorities. And then lastly, it's something that Nestor has just touched upon as well, which is we need to look at how we can improve efficiency in data sharing and interoperability of information. And we have to look at harmonized or opportunities for harmonizing models in relation to targeting, beneficiary registration and inclusion, with the same intentions as maybe mentioned in the earlier question of reducing assessment fatigue, improving efficiency, making the response more timely, and also making the transition from emergency to longer term solutions more seamless. This is, of course, an opportunity, especially as we look at not just being focused on internally displaced populations, but also on inclusion of broader host communities. So the example is, of course, very ambitious, but if we were to have a single beneficiary registry for emergency, early recovery and development, that would be a significant step, but also recognizing that that is quite ambitious. Over.
Thank you, Tallene, for these very useful insights and areas for further reflections for us. WFP has been one of the lead agencies on interoperability. Mark, could you explain a bit more about the challenges you are facing in putting into place interoperable beneficiary systems in a crisis with the scale of Yemen? What could we do to overcome these challenges? Mark, we cannot hear you.
About that, let me try that again. No, I think as what has been said by Hamza and by Tallene, I think when we're looking at interoperability, it's really how do we have a consolidated approach to understanding who we are assisting and what are the different types of assistance and needs populations, communities, households, and individuals have. And I think this becomes the real challenge, because if we're looking, for example, at displaced populations, we have certain needs that we initially assume are going to be the priority. But as displacement becomes protracted, those needs will evolve. And how do we then use the evidence and information that we have, that we collect regularly, be it through our complaints and beneficiary complaints and feedback mechanisms, through our longitudinal monitoring, through call centers, through even face-to-face and key informant discussions with the communities and beneficiaries. How do we use that information in a collective way to ensure that a household or a group of households that have been displaced within 3 to 6 months, as their needs evolve, are receiving the right type of assistance? And I think one of the challenges we have, as has been mentioned, is really how do we have that interoperable data capacity that allows us to access and use it in a way that assists the communities more efficiently and more effectively. And I think in Yemen, given the complexity of the crisis, has been a real challenge in looking at how we can bring that interoperability together.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for these very interesting insights and for your frank reflections. We will now have two interventions from organizations that are part of the Cash Consortium of Yemen. We will start with a contribution from IOM, which is represented by Mr. Firas Budeiri, followed by a question from the Norwegian Refugee Council, represented by its country director, Mrs. Yerin Hutchinson. I would still ask you to stick to maximum 2 minutes, if possible. I would like to give the floor to Firas first from IOM. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. As you are all aware, the Cash Consortium of Yemen has been the foundation for establishing joint standards and mechanisms, and also enabling effective sequence with in-kind assistance. Naturally, the RRM interoperable system is a really successful model in Yemen that exemplifies this. And IOM is very proud of its role here, co-leading the RRM sector on cash assistance and the CCY. Through these partnerships, a model has been established that integrates that in-kind and cash assistance into a single registration program that ensures effective targeting and immediate error. As a result, we now have an e-system that allows timely, accurate, and protected data that allows interoperability between UNFPA dashboard for in-kind RRM and the consortium database. Now, obviously, achieving interoperability required that throughout this project, we review our processes around data collection and sharing, and critically consider challenges to strengthen collaborations and obviously, above all, UNFPA and the consortium partners and IOM have prioritized throughout this model speed and accuracy to ensure that people receive the assistance when they need it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Firas. I now give the floor to Yerin from NRC, who has a question to DRC.
Thank you. This is a question for Talene. With a number of different agencies involved, how are we ensuring that we have effective two-way dialogue with communities and that we ensure accountability to them?
Thanks for the
question,
Erin.
Can I ask you to repeat, Yerin, because the sound was very bad.
Yes. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Perfect. With a number of different agencies involved, how are we ensuring that we have effective two-way dialogue with communities and that we ensure accountability to them?
Thank you for the question, Erin. Of course, the Cash Consortium partners are committed to effective programming, which includes accountability mechanisms and different initiatives to support dialogue and feedback with communities. As a first step, Cash Consortium partners do have in place feedback and complaint response mechanisms that are safe and accessible to communities. This can be in many different modalities, whether it's hotlines, feedback desks during distributions, feedback boxes, just to name a few. But this does allow the community to raise questions, complaints, or feedback through the modality that is most comfortable and most accessible to them. And CCY partners, of course, use their existing procedures to then respond to these complaints or feedback in a timely and appropriate manner. As a second step, the CASH Consortium is also working on harmonizing messaging and communication with communities to ensure consistency. As an example, we often hear questions from the communities that we serve about individuals targeting, about transfer values, and others. So this is an example where harmonized messaging has been effective in ensuring consistency of messaging regarding targeting or other programmatic questions. As a third step as well, CASH Consortium partners do also conduct post-distribution monitoring. This is more focused on feedback on the effectiveness of the assistance and on the quality of the response from the communities. But given that the CCY response has been predominantly focused on internally displaced communities, this is where we see the added value of having different agencies involved who are implementing multi-sectoral responses in different geographic locations. And many of these different areas have their own localized context that really needs to be taken into consideration as we engage in dialogue with communities. As an example, at the end of last year, DRC held discussions with displaced communities on the Red Sea coast regarding enablers and challenges for durable solutions to their displacement, including their intentions to settle or to return. The feedback received from the communities supports not only the individual agency's strategic direction and program adaptation, but also directly feeds into the discussions and the decisions within the CASH Consortium, especially as we really try to work towards these stronger linkages between cash assistance and longer term solutions to displacement. We need the voice of communities to define which durable solutions are relevant. And this is just one example of how we have gone about this. There are similar conversations happening with communities by CASH Consortium partners. Some partners are supporting as well election of community representatives to then feedback and support the dialogue with both internally displaced communities and with the host community. But that being said, we also need to acknowledge that there are many more opportunities to improve how we engage with communities in effective dialogue as RM partners, as CCY partners, and generally as a broader humanitarian community. And this needs to be evaluated on the level of the overall Yemen response, including taking into consideration some of the key recommendations and observations and findings that may come out of the ongoing interagency standing committee evaluation for Yemen. We also need to acknowledge that the challenges of operating in Yemen and this context does pose very particular challenges, as we really cannot speak about improving accountability towards communities or strengthening dialogue without addressing broader challenges to humanitarian access and principled assistance in Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Talin, for this very detailed answer, and thank you all for your active participation and contribution to this talk. We are very encouraged, I must say, by today's discussion. It is clear that cash assistance, as one element of comprehensive assistance to people in need, is possible even in very challenging contexts, such as Yemen. Beneficiaries often prefer cash if the circumstances allow for it, given the flexibility and the dignity that cash provides to people in need. And while there are still some challenges ahead to further operationalize the smooth sequencing of aid, interoperability represents a cornerstone of Nexus in action and has the potential to strengthen the coordination of crisis response towards a more accountability to affected populations. We have heard a clear example of how cash increases impact, but also how interoperable beneficiary systems ensure complementarity of humanitarian programs and better sequencing between different programs. And we have heard agencies talking about the next layer of interoperability vis-à-vis longer-term assistance. This convergence of services and better integration of emergency and development aid is a key demand both from beneficiaries and authorities emerging from all corners of Yemen at the moment. We hope that this session has contributed to shed some light on our next steps to assisting Yemen effectively and efficiently. I really want to thank you all for all your active participation and for your contribution to this talk.